I feel the same way about dogs. I feel like they brought me back to life. They carried me through a lot of really hard times in my own personal journey, and being able to reflect on that, it does. You light up. That joy comes back to you. You have all those memories, and it's fun to relive those moments of a not so great time in your life. You know that moment when someone tells you your dog needs a muzzle and your stomach just drops? If that's ever happened to you, just breathe. You are not alone and you're not doing anything wrong. My guest today, Madison from Freed by Training, gets it. She's created an incredible free muzzle training course that walks you through it step by step with kindness and clarity. Whether you're navigating reactivity, safety, or just want to do it right from the start, this course is honestly such a gift. And if you're starting out with a new puppy, she's got a free puppy resource bundle too, with everything you need to set up your dog for success without the overwhelm. You can grab both of those and even book a free phone consult if you're not sure what your dog really needs at freedbytraining.com, or just tap the link in the show notes. Seriously, don't miss out on these. They're free and they're actually helpful. Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk, the podcast that gets real about the highs, the lows, and the lessons of life with dogs. I'm your host, Em, dog trainer, canine nutritionist, and creator of this space where pet parents, pros, and passionate dog lovers come to feel seen, supported, and never judged. Around here, we don't gatekeep. We share the real conversations, honest experiences, and practical insights that help you build a stronger bond with the dog in front of you, no matter where you're starting, so you can stop Googling and start feeling seen, supported, and confident in the dog parent you are. Today's guest is someone I deeply, both personally and professionally, admire. Madison Skoog Simpson is a dog trainer, educator, and the founder of Freed by Training, a mentorship space for professionals and pet parents alike. But before all of that, Madison's journey began in a place few people would expect: prison. During a 5-year sentence, Madison found purpose, healing, and a second chance through training dogs. And now she helps others find their own version of freedom, whether they're struggling with shame, trauma, or dogs that have been written off. She's a friend and a mentor to me since before Straight Up Dog Talk even existed, and I can't wait to hear this conversation. It's about transformation, second chances, and how healing happens often when we least expect it. This episode is for you if you ever felt stuck, ashamed, or afraid you've messed up too much to start over. Here's what you'll take away: what it really looks like to find purpose through pain, how training dogs helped Madison come back to herself, how prison-based dog training programs can change lives on both ends of the leash, and why second chances matter, what it means to own your story and let go of the shame that's been holding you back in dog training, in life, and in healing. Madison, you've shared before that you were broken with a capital B when you went to prison. What brought you to that point, and what did healing look like in the very beginning of your journey?
There was a lot of shame around ending up incarcerated and being in that situation. And the healing that I needed to do was very, very layered. There were relationships that needed healed in my life, including the one with myself. There was a lot of physical trauma that was being stored in the body that took a long time to unravel. And I know something that you and I have talked about is there was a period of time, both leading up to and then especially in the early days of my incarceration, where I was very heavily medicated, especially for me. And that led to a deep paralysis of any action, of any movement, that if I had stayed there, I'd still be there. Even out here, I'd still be there. So that was one of the first things that I really had to move through and figure out, was actually healing the physical body to be able to even move forward from anything else. I was also 230 pounds when I arrived to prison. I was carrying a lot, right?
Mentally and physically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that about your weight. I knew about the medications because, as you said, we've talked about our journey with medications and both of us moving towards getting off of medications, being over medicated by a system that we had no control over. And what's really scary is that it happened to you while you were incarcerated, but it happened to me while I was not.
Yeah.
And I think that something that society has normalized is that taking antidepressants and taking things like Xanax or lorazepam or Klonopin is normal, right? We take our Xanax and we drink our wine. But honestly, I'm not sure that that is necessarily the right way. If we could actually all sit down and learn how to deal with our emotions and process them, things might look a little bit different. How did you advocate for yourself when it came to the medication?
Well, I think it's important to know that I was already on medication prior to arriving at the prison where I spent a little bit more than half of my 5-year sentence. I believe I was on a 25 milligram dose of Zoloft. We called it the anxiety dose, and it was just to just help with day-to-day anxiety. But when I arrived at the institution, that was increased to 200, and multiple other medications were added in. And the process of getting the medications was a little bit burdensome because they're not just going to give a bunch of controlled substances to inmates, right? So we had to go to special meds. Now, you could get your allergy medications given to you in quantity, but with these types of medications, you were getting just your dose administered in a way that they could make sure that you were taking it. And so the process to actually get off of those didn't begin until after I was out of the admissions phase, when I could actually initiate a conversation with the mental health department. That is also kind of tricky. I didn't start that until there was really a catalyst. One of the medications that they had added in, there was Inderall and Elavil. I believe it was the Elavil made me start sleepwalking. When I was released from admissions, which is like a 30-day period where they medically clear you, assess you for security and things like that. I was living on a top bunk in open housing. So there were about 300 women in one room. It was not safe or ideal to be walking around and climbing down off of the bunk. When I reported these side effects, they swapped it for a different drug, which made me start sleep eating. And my neighbors the next morning told me, "You were making a real racket, eating a bunch of chips in the middle of the night." And sure enough, a whole bag of chips was gone. I remember going to the mental health department and expressing these concerns. And the response to my concerns was to hand me a list of medication options and say, "Okay, what do you want then?" And that was so deeply worrying that I decided literally right then and there, I handed the list back. I told them I wanted to be taken off of the 2 medications that they had added on, which I'd been refusing on a nightly basis since the sleep eating. You could go to your medication dispenser and say, I'm here because you had to be there, you get in trouble, but I'm going to refuse this medication. And then I asked them to reduce the dosage of the Zoloft that they had increased, and we slowly brought it down. And at the same time, my bunkie, who during this process, I moved out of that open housing. I was not there long. I got right into the dog program. My bunkie signed me up for a running program. It was 10 weeks to 5K because there was a prison-wide 5K. And she didn't ask, she just signed me up. So there was that. So getting off of the medication and sort of also getting, I don't want to say taking control, although I think in that moment it was like, I'm going to take control in my life wherever I can get it right now. But getting healthy and starting, those two things very much ran parallel. Also to the dog trainings. I made the decision to start healing, and all of these positive things started to get aligned, even in a pretty dark place.
It's funny how that happens with healing, right? Once we start on the path to healing, that's when everything starts to feel like you're in the right time, you're in the right place. And then all of the other things that you weren't even expecting just kind of start coming in from nowhere. And you start to change your attitude, you start to change your thought pattern, and that changes your whole day-to-day life. What shifts did you notice after you made that intention to get healthier and get off the medication?
Yes, again, all of these things, and maybe it's just blurred because time has passed at this point, but the beginnings are kind of tied together. Getting into the dog program, because I had to apply and be accepted to get into the dog program because it was considered honors housing. The shift was in no way subtle because I went from being overly medicated, sleeping 18 hours a day. I had been assigned a job that I went to once, and they were like, "We don't need you, but we're not going to reclassify you. Go and sleep away your 5 years," to basically boot camp. You were up, your bed was made in a very specific way. There were rules against cussing from basically 6 or 7 a.m. until 4 p.m., you were in a very certain place at a very certain time and you were working. Like I said, it wasn't subtle. It was like complete upheaval of what I had come to know, but I hadn't been there for very long. October was when I arrived. And so I spent 30 days in admissions. And so November, December, January, February, like 4 months was all I spent in that open style housing, which was tough. And then being moved back into an area where not only was it an environment change, it was the same prison, it was the same institution, but it was a very different culture. And I was surrounded by other people that also had a desire to do something more than just sleep away 5 years, right? So that was massively impactful to be around people who sign you up for 5 days without asking.
Were you surprised that there was such a big difference between where you left and where you went to? Did you notice that was the case in other areas of dormitory situations as well? Or do you think it was just because you had to be so on schedule because of the dogs?
The first institution that I was at, it was pretty large. It's the largest women's prison in Ohio, like 3,600 women. So there were a lot of little pockets of different cultures. Now, things have changed. Even while I was there, they demolished buildings and built new ones, and they've done that since I've been there. So things have definitely changed. But when I was there was one building in particular that I know is no longer there. That was called Lincoln. And that's where they housed two things in particular. The first is the Greyhound program, which is not the program that I was a part of. The second is this was the dedicated location for inmates with life sentences. So that has a very particular culture to it. And those two things are not unrelated. The Greyhound program was run by lifers. All of those dogs were there to just learn how to become dogs and be pets. And it was really, really beautiful. But our program was different because we had all of this structure and it was a business. It was this self-sustaining business of the daycare and services for the staff, state employees, really, as well as the service dog and the Humane Society. So yeah, there were lots of pockets of cultures that I was aware of. And even before I was released from admissions, you would hear from other inmates like, oh, you don't want to pop out to this unit. They're off the chain, right? Or you really want to end up over here. And the building that I was in, that was this big open bay, was called Hale, Hale. But everyone would say like, oh, Hale. Nobody really wanted to end up there.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about those first few weeks. What was it like? What shifted for you after you started training dogs and learning about training dogs?
I think people maybe think I'm joking about this when I say that when I first started training dogs, they didn't let us have a dog for 30 days. I walked a leash with no dog on the end of it for 30 days. Now, if I had somebody with me observing as my mentor, as my buddy, actively working with me, I was allowed to have a real dog. But there was a lot of preparation. There was a lot of education. There was a 10-week curriculum. And you had to go through these 10 weeks of classes and at the end of each week take an exam. And at the end of the 10 weeks, you needed an 80% average to be able to pass. Otherwise, you went back in and you started. And you needed all of this to be able to become an actual handler. Because again, we were being trusted with the dogs of the state employees. Now, this could be corrections officers, unit managers, highway patrol officers, wardens of other prisons. And they needed to be sure that we knew what we were doing. And there was a high volume of dogs, 40 or 50 or more on a daycare day of just the staff dogs. So it was a lot of chaos too, of getting on this new rhythm, and it kicked my butt. I remember the first couple of days sleeping so hard at the end of the day. And remember, it was so different from the sleep that I had been sleeping, which was just, I'm super medicated. I'm reading Game of Thrones during my only waking hours, and I'm just sleeping and I'm bored. This was like, I worked myself to the bone because for an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, everybody lines up and they walk and they walk. And if you don't have a dog, you're a spacer in between people with dogs. And you walk and you walk and you walk and you walk. And the rest of the day we were in classes learning, or we were in training circle, which is where you circle up with the dogs and there's a caller in the middle calling out, have your dog sit, praise them, have them stay, take 3 steps away, call them to you. And it was just really hard. And I remember not being sure if I would make it, if I would last, because there were so many rules on top of there being institutional rules that if you had a corrections officer write you up a conduct report on an institutional rule, that can go against early release or something like that. It's very important. So you have those. And then back in these honor dorms, you also have these interlocks that are assigned inmate to inmate by inmates who are in positions of authority within the hierarchy of the unit and the structure, because we had housing advisors, hallway advisors, program advisors. And so if you got, I think, 5 of those interlocks in a 90-day period, you're back out to general population. And some of them were, if your bed was not made properly, or if they heard you cussing on the yard, they could write you an interlock. So it was just a lot. I remember thinking, like, this is so much. Like, what if I can't keep up? I don't want to go back there. I want to be here with the dogs. It also felt very private because they were 4-man cells. So compared to having 299 roommates, I only had 3 roommates, and that felt great. That felt like a huge improvement. And we had our own toilet. That was also very, very,
That's a
very
big deal.
big deal. Yeah, very, very big deal. I mean, no privacy because the toilet was just right there, but it was still better than having to share 10 toilets with 300 women.
That would be very difficult for me. I like my privacy when it comes to the bathroom. That would be very hard for me.
And the walls where I was before, where the toilets were in a separate area, it wasn't even private because the walls only came up to about here. So you could just look and be like, hi, the person right next to you.
Get comfy with being uncomfortable.
I made best friends with being uncomfortable. That's just the truth of it, is you get used to that very, very quickly. Comfort is not something that was promised in the incarceration experience. And so again, grab it where you can find it. And if that means it's having that much more privacy within where you're residing, then I was willing to work to keep hold of that.
What do you think those years of working with dogs inside the prison taught you about responsibility, connection, and self-love?
Responsibility, connection, and self-love. I have lost a lot of things, a lot of qualities, I think, throughout the process just leading up to that time. But I've always been a responsible person. I've always taken responsibility, taken accountability and ownership. And I don't feel like that ever got lost in the process. In fact, I feel like that was magnified in the process, the ultimate taking of accountability for your actions. But on the opposite end, connection is something I had leading up to going to prison. I spent as much time as I could building up as many walls as I could, saying to myself, you're not going to make any friends. You're not going to let anybody in. You're going to be so tough. And so I was very against really making any connections in there. But that's exactly what the dogs were. They were the easiest thing in the world to connect with. Now, self-love came a long time later. That's really like a more recent learning in my life. But at that point, I was still so deep in the opposite end of that spectrum, which is self-loathing. So dogs were absolutely instrumental to the very beginning stages of crawling or clawing out of that particular pit. But they made me give out love every day in a place where I didn't expect to. And that was an important to start getting into, to be able to then receive it again and to be able to then have that connection. So of course, dogs for me are part of everything and all parts of my journey and all parts of the story. But the self-love, I think, like I said, came much later.
People think that you have to be perfect to work with dogs, but you found working with dogs through imperfection. What did it teach you?
I'm still learning this one. Because even recently, people have said to me, oh, I thought you had it all together. And I'm like, really? Because my whole life was on fire last year. What I want to say is that the current lesson that I'm learning is to show up in the imperfection. Because perfection was never the goal anyway. Nobody wants that. Nobody cares about that. And to show up in your imperfection is to be willing to be vulnerable enough to make space for other people to show up as they are. And it's so important. I was talking about this with Jerry the other day about the need to just be vulnerable. And there were things that I was admitting that were happening, right? Like Remy ate a cookie. He ate half of a chocolate chip cookie. And trainers don't want to admit that their dogs do things like that. And we just have to be willing to show up imperfectly. Otherwise, we're not going to be approachable and we're not going to be able to help people. And that's the first step, right? Is for people to come into our worlds and to be ready for help and to be honest with us about what's really going on And if we're not being honest, then they can't. That doesn't create safe space for them to do that either.
I completely agree with that. I think that it's better to show up authentically and messily and say, hey, I had all these bad things happen to me, or we've had these bad experiences. I posted a reel the other day about Fitz having a reaction in the front yard, and I shared it because I want people to see it doesn't matter how long you've been working on a thing, stuff still happens. You cannot control everything. There is no perfection when it comes with dogs. And to expect that, like you said, is completely unrealistic. And also, who wants a statue for a dog? Not me. Not me.
Well, if you do, you could have just gotten a statue, right? Like they have those. They have dog statues. You don't need to get a live one then. They
You
also
could
have
get a
robot
stuffed one,
ones. Yeah. There are great alternatives. Pet rocks are great company for the right person.
just like a fish, but you don't have to feed it.
Exactly. For some people, a pet rock is exactly what they're probably looking for in terms of the amount of care that they want to put into it. They got very honest with themselves.
Oh my gosh. How did you learn to own your story without shame? Since we're talking about that, I know that this was a journey for you. And I know that you've had a lot of support and encouragement from people like Jerry, from people like me, from other people saying, you know what, we're out here trying to do the same thing. You should do it too. But what was the real tipping point for you?
So I want to talk about the people that were the opposite of that positive influence and the fact that there were a couple of influences that were very much encouraging me to keep things in the dark. And this is part of the reason why the brand, the dog training business that I had created and spent a period of time building, burnt it to the ground. And what I built from those ashes was freed by training. And even though it wasn't right in that moment that I came out to tell my story, that was the big moment of like, this is who I am. Barbed wire and the logo and everything, right? Like it felt like such a bold statement, but it was because of being told to keep it a secret. And I remember that there was a trainer that wanted me to come and work for them. And they said to me when they found out that I was getting married that it was a great opportunity to change my name and that if it were them, they would have done it the second they got out. And I decided then and there that I was not going to be changing my last name because I'm proud of my family and my parents and where I'm from. And even though there's a dark part of my story, I'm not willing to build anything around trying to keep something a secret. And I did. I did try and keep it a secret for the first several years of my training. And I was exhausted, constantly afraid that my clients were going to figure me out, Google me, right? Something like that. And it was very, very scary. And I chose just not to have it have that hold on me anymore. I wanted to own the narrative. I wanted it to be something that I could talk about. And it's taken years of practice to be where I am now of being able to talk about it. But you're absolutely right. There have been so many people to shed light on it. Jerry is my ultimate safe space for stuff like that because she and I have both taken the dark night of the soul thing pretty much as far as it'll go. Somebody who I don't talk about a lot, and it's not for lack of love, but for an overabundance of respect for privacy, is my dear husband, who is my rock, my biggest hype person, my best friend, and is just think of the most supportive person in the world. And he's that times 10. So, and again, it's not for lack of love that he's not super present on my social media. That's how he prefers it. He prefers the yearly birthday and anniversary shout outs, and that's about it. But yeah, it's not been easy to get to this point of being able to talk about it in this way. And even still, I get scared sometimes. I care far less about being comfortable than I do about reaching people who could like actually change their lives with something that I might be able to share. And that's just so much more important to me. And like I said, I made besties with being uncomfortable. So discomfort and we do just fine. So any discomfort that I feel from having to talk about hard things is just nothing compared to the messages that I get from people that say that they feel safe and they feel seen and they are ready to give out or receive a second chance somewhere in their life.
I love that. I also love that you keep your relationship with your husband. I won't say his name. I know that you've posted it on social media before, but I won't say it even though I know what it is out of respect for him. But I love that you keep that private because I don't personally have anybody in my life right now, But if I did, I would be the same way, because I think that there's a point to our vulnerability, to our sharing, to our being transparent that is our part of the journey. But there are also other parts where our family is involved, or our loved one is involved, our partner, our sister, our brother, whatever. And maybe they don't want to be part of that public aspect. And so I think that it's really important to know where the boundary is when it comes to sharing and oversharing, because I think that you can share all of these deep, dark parts of you, but when you start pulling other people in and forcing them to share, then you're not allowing them the freedom of their own journey the way that they allowed it for you. So I think that's really amazing that you do that and that you pay attention.
And it's just not important for him to have a presence in the online space in that way. But what I will share, because I think it's hilarious, is that he's a cat person. Never had a dog before he married me. Talk about getting thrown into the deep end.
Well, it seems like he's adjusted pretty well, and he's always very thoughtful and very helpful when it comes to taking care of Remy. So you're very lucky that
Yes,
he adjusted quickly.
I am. Well, we also have the cat.
That's true. You do have the cat too.
We don't have to talk about her though.
Oh my gosh. Cats are something else. They truly are something else. And I feel like they kind of test us in a totally different way than dogs do.
She has taught me so much, period. I have learned so much through having her, but she is a challenge.
They definitely are. My roommate has an orange cat, and I have learned so much about how different orange cats are that it's just become this little inner dialogue that I have with myself about, well, what would the orange cat do? And it's always something way different than any of the other cats or any of the dogs would do.
Yeah, I've heard that they're pretty off the wall.
They're very strange beings, that's for sure. They're the alien of
Speaking of
aliens.
cats, actually, we had cats in that particular housing unit. We had a set number of cats that we were allowed to have from the local humane society. When I moved into my cell, there were two cats in there. They had this big cage on top of the dog kennel, which they had to be locked up in during the day, but then they could be out at night and on weekends, with like multiple levels. You know what I'm saying? There was Patty. Patty's all black, big girl, big girl. And then there was Weedy, and Weedy was like a tuxedo cat, but he had these enormous saber-toothed tiger teeth, which was like so wild. But he had really bad allergies, and he would sneeze and launch boogers. Like we would have to like, all right, everyone, this Saturday we're gonna be scraping Weedy's boogers off the walls. It was disgusting, but we loved these cats. Oh, and Patty was mean. She was a mean cat, but we still love them. We still loved them, and it was so special to just have animals around. Again, I'm not even a cat person, and I loved the crap out of these cats because it was just so special, and they were a constant. Once my bunkie went home, she somehow finagled it to get the cat passed to me instead of moving to the next person whose turn it actually was. She was like, "No, it's easier on the cat for her to not move cells." I'm like, "Okay." So Patty got to stay with me, and we were together for about 2 years until I was transferred to the next institution. And so, yeah, I think about her sometimes.
That's so cool. I like that they had that because, again, that bonding, that inner relationship with the animal is so different than it is with humans, right? And in a place like prison where you're already feeling bad for being in there, you're already feeling judged for being in there, having a space where you have that unconditional love and affection from something, whether it's a dog or a cat, is so much more valuable and is going to keep you going a little bit.
And it just felt like a little normal too. Just kind of like a normal thing to take care of a cat and, litter box and put the food. It just was all like, it felt very like the real world. And there were a lot of things slapping you in the face constantly to remind you that you are not in your real, your regular everyday life. Something that I was just thinking of that I don't think I've talked about, and I don't know that it is talked about, but the particular experience and feeling, which is not a good feeling, to be an inmate in a prison when a tour comes through,
I didn't know
to
they still
be
did that.
all the time, to be looked at in that way, gawked at in that way, is very dehumanizing.
Yeah, that's something I would have to sit with for a while. I don't know how I would feel about that. It's almost like the old circuses, right? Like going to the old circuses and seeing like the freak show. I'm saying that lightly
Oh
with
yeah,
love, okay?
yeah, yeah. That's exactly what it was. And we used to joke like don't feed the monkeys. We used to like joke to like put up signs, right? And now it wasn't a public tour where somebody could come by and spend $2 and come and see the freaks. It wasn't like that. There were schools and there were other state employees coming to do tours, and it was frequent enough to be a feeling that I remember and it not being a good feeling.
Do you think if you hadn't been in the program with the dogs, things would have ended differently for you? What would it have changed in your current trajectory of life?
I would have nothing that I have right now without that, because that was the only thing that kept me from being completely consumed by just all of the darkness that I felt. Because when I was originally in that place where I have a job, I don't have anything to do, again, I was sleeping 18 hours a day, which sounds really difficult until again you realize that I was taking enough medication to make that not super difficult. I don't know that I would have done anything with that time. And there's this phrase that there is absolutely no way that I could pinpoint where I heard it. I've done no research to know where it came from or who said it first, but they said, you either do the time or the time does you. And I didn't want the time to do me. I wanted to do something with the time. The fact that I lost 90 pounds while I was incarcerated is actually like, that's not the norm. I feel like there is this mental image of men going to prison and getting really buff, and that does happen. Not for the women, typically. Typically, it's in the opposite direction because what is available is not healthy foods. It is very difficult to get any sort of good nutrition in that sort of setting. In fact, the only institutional conduct report I got at the second institution was because they caught me with vegetables from the garden. How dare I? How dare I try and eat healthy? Oh,
Oh
yeah. It
gosh.
was like half a cucumber and some basil. And they were like, what were you going to do with the basil? I said, well, I'm going to crush it up and smoke it. What do you think I was going to do? I was going to make pesto. I just wanted good pasta.
I just wanted something to taste delicious for once.
Yeah. Well, on that note, the food at like what was supplied, which I'm not going to take away from the fact that there is a certain relief to having a place to, they call it 3 hops and a cot. I had somewhere to sleep. I had food every day. However, it was a 3-week rotation on the menu. So it was the same stuff over and 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 over again. And also, I didn't do well with the food. I had a lot of trouble keeping down and digesting and breaking down the soy-based products, which was a lot of what was offered. So I just had a lot of physical issues there. So it became important for me to try and figure out what healthier options were available. And it wasn't easy. And it did, in one instance, involve me with contraband vegetables. But I got
I
caught.
mean,
I was like, you
you
got
can
me.
laugh about it now. That's all that matters, right? That's all that
I was
matters.
about to go home. I didn't care. I think it's hilarious. Even my sergeant thought it was hilarious. She was like, Spook, you're about to go home and you got caught with a half a cucumber. She said, you should have eaten the whole thing. Yeah, I should have.
You should have been the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Trying to save it for later.
Hindsight, it gets us all throughout life, right? Oh my goodness. Tell us a little bit about the dog training program. What was it like to go through that? And what do you think was the biggest lesson that you learned from it?
So at the first institution I was at, the dog training program had the three main components. There was the daycare boarding for staff dogs, primarily staff dogs. It was a big enough institution that there were a lot of staff members with dogs, but also, again, any state employee could really bring their dog. Then there was the service dog portion, and then there was also a humane society portion. The daycare portion, you just got assigned a dog typically for a day, or if they were boarding, you might have them for a couple of days, or a portion of being boarded for a couple of days. But with the humane society and the service dog work, inmates were assigned dogs on rotation. So you might have a dog that you were the handler for that dog for 6 weeks. We tried to find a good kind of rhythm to keep the dog moving to different handlers to keep it beneficial for the dog, but also beneficial for a larger number of the handlers to get that experience, because we typically only had like 6 shelter dogs at a time versus 50 or so daycare dogs. So people wanted the experience with the shelter dogs typically.
What was your favorite rotation to work in? Did you like having the dog all the time, or did you like getting different dogs through daycare?
So I was an odd one because when I got there, my Bunkie, I'm not saying that she was in charge of anything in an official capacity, but I got the sense that she just sort of made stuff happen. So when she left, again, I took over the cat and the dog that she had been watching, which is our sergeant's dog. And so he was my regular daycare dog, which they didn't actually have regular daycare dogs, but because he had special medical needs, they needed him to go to a consistent handler because he was there several days a week. So my time in the daycare portion was mostly with Pepe, who was about 1,000,000 years old and did not move a lot. And I loved with all of my heart because of one of my other cellmates coming into prison and this program with existing previous skills in grooming. I also kind of got sucked into, or maybe suckered into, grooming and learning to groom from her, and then actually became a full-time groomer. So I stopped taking daycare dogs and was grooming full time, and then also training others to groom. I was okay. I wasn't great. I say over and over again, grooming is way harder than training. They have a way harder job than us. But I did really enjoy my time with the Humane Society dogs. That was like really special to me. My first one, his name was Adam, and he was like a chocolate lab, but maybe like a shepherdy kind of mixed in because he had this like kind of cool floofy tail. It wasn't super floofy. And he was the first reactive dog I ever handled. And I was in denial. I remember when somebody who had been there and been doing it a lot longer than me, they said, Adam's pretty reactive. And I was like, no, he's just emotional. And I got so defensive. I took it real personally. Mind you, I'd known this dog for probably 6 days and was just completely rejecting that label for the longest time, which is like, okay, his behavior is reactive. So therefore, he's being a reactive dog. It wasn't that serious. But he ended up getting adopted by a staff member. And anytime he was in my unit, he would always poke his head in and be like, Adam's doing great. And be like, yeah, I loved it. It was like, that was like, that meant everything to me to be able to be a part of something like that. And that's the dog that's where I put in my reps. If you think of your favorite athlete out there getting in their reps, getting in their dribbles, that was me and Adam every single day, rain or shine, leash drills. Come on, bud. We can do it. We can do it. I figured out and learned so much working with this dog. There are so many lessons and things I still use today that I can trace back to Adam in 2017, 2016, somewhere in that region. I never really got deep into the service work other than there were a couple of litters that cycled through, and there was one litter of poodles, and I grew pretty fond of a couple of them, and also was their groomer, and also got to do like cool things. So we had Biz, she was our punk rock poodle. So we would give her a mohawk and these little like bracelets and stuff, and I would carve a skull and crossbone into her hip, and she was so sassy. Oh my gosh. So there are just so many dogs that you can tell as soon as I start thinking of these dogs, I'm like, there was this one and this one, like years and years and years later, and they just brought me back to life. That's just what it is,
I love that. I feel the same way about dogs. They definitely brought me back to life. They carried me through a lot of really hard times in my own personal journey, and being able to reflect on that, it does. You light up. That joy comes back to you. You have all those memories, and it's fun to relive those moments of a not so great time in your life. I know that in prison, the way that they taught you would be more, let's say, balanced leaning, if not totally balanced. But you have shifted your training style and evolved it into your own unique kind of training since you have come home and started your own business. What made you decide to make that shift from what you were trained to what you decided to create on your own?
I love this question because it kind of is a pretty clear like progression and journey for me. Of the first institution that I was at, sure, we could call it balance. It was probably compulsion training, really. Like we were taught about alpha roles. There was another inmate who taught us something like an alpha roll, but it was like more of like a running tackle move, like from across the room kind of a thing. We named it after that inmate. But then at the second institution, very positive reinforcement. What's interesting is that they were very different educations and they each existed within this little microcosm. Because like we didn't have internet. There was some TV, like some, Caesar and Brandon McMillan were on TV. So you could watch them. Both programs had book libraries, so you could read the books that were available. But other than that, you had what you had. So I learned from what I learned from. And then when I was released, I almost even swung the opposite way because that was my first experience with the e-collar, the most modern training tool, right? Well, I haven't been around this. It to me felt new and progressive, and ultimately is the reason that I then swung in the opposite direction because of the breakdown in relationship that was caused. There was a particular individual who I think is really responsible for that, in addition to like moments that happened between me and my dog that reflected back to me why those practices were not working for us. And she is somebody that I met shortly after being released. She was not a trainer at the time that we met, but wanted to be a trainer and had been doing a lot of self-education. And so when I started training, she came on to train with me, and she was a friend and she was a colleague, and she had the courage to call out something within my training that she felt was not right, which is so hard to tell somebody that you love that you don't agree with something that they're doing. Like, that's so hard. That's harder than if it's somebody that you don't, care about at all. Even harder than if you don't like them. But it was something related to using pressure and place training. And she was totally spot on with the fact that what I was doing was not appropriate. But it was what she said to me and the phrase that has been core to my training since, I don't want to say since that day, because the day she said it to me, that's not the day it impacted me. It's one of those phrases that like worms its way into your brain and unfolds over years. And what she said was, efficiency isn't enough. Efficiency isn't everything. And it stuck with me of like, it's not. And I had been treating that to be the case. And it's really shaped a more compassionate and patient approach. I like to say that I'm the alternative. I'm not trying to paint any illusions that I'm the best trainer, the only trainer, anything like that. I'm an alternative for people who care about the things that I care about, for people who care about their relationship with their dog, who care about communication, who are not as concerned with efficiency as they are with how they feel about the methods. Because I do believe where we're going, how we get there, and how we feel about how we got there, I think it all matters. I think how we feel about the way that we train matters. And I had a lot of dog parents say to me that they've been told that how they feel about the training methods that doesn't matter. And I think that that's a real shame. I am a human who has been deeply in a position to have my agency taken away, and I refuse to do that to dogs any longer.
I love that. I love that very much. It's one of the reasons that I really enjoyed working with you, is because that was one of my big things, right? As I came off of somebody telling me that Fitz was too much. He was too hard. He wasn't manageable or handleable.
People have said that
And
about me.
people said
She's
that
too
about me
much.
too.
She's unmanageable. Yeah, I get that a lot.
But, put him on a prong collar, put him on an e-collar. And I did, because I didn't know better. And I felt gross about it for an entire 8 months. I was, as soon as I could, all that went in the trash. It did, because I think that there are so many better ways to move forward with your relationship with yourself. Being intact is going to help your relationship with your dog be intact. And dogs really give you that opportunity because they are so resilient and they do bounce back. You give them an opportunity to trust you and learn from you again, and they're like, let's go, And unfortunately, people are not like that all the time. There are some people that are like that, but not a lot.
Well, we can increase our resilience and our capacity just like dogs, but I actually find that humans are far, far more resistant to change than dogs are.
I completely agree. What do you wish more people understood about people coming out of prison, or about dogs who have been labeled too much?
People coming out of prison. I myself was a real feral creature for a couple months. It took me as long or longer to adjust coming out than it did going in. It was harder to adjust coming out than going in, because I also then had a million real world responsibilities again and was trying to sift through trauma that I had just been living in for 5 years. So people coming out of prison are at the highest risk for recidivism, which means to go back. And it's because, well, this is my opinion. I don't need numbers here to back this up, but it has a lot to do with the support system that they have and where they're going back to. I'm very, very blessed I have an incredible family, and they let feral me live with them for several months and really held it down for me while I was struggling. So lots of compassion, lots of space. Halfway houses are an incredibly important resource within our communities. There needs to be more transitional resources. There needs to be more funding for anti-recidivism. There isn't likely to be changes there because we have for-profit prisons and people are making a lot of money off of the fact that America incarcerates at, and here I am going to use a number, even though it could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's like 10 times the rate of any other country, even the next highest one. So it's really a problem. Now, the dogs that are too much, I think that that's where we need to look at our expectations and we need to look at what are we even living with here? What even is this creature? You need to be looking at genetics and taking them seriously and understanding that bringing a working line dog into a home as a pet without giving them an appropriate outlet has only one ending, which is the dog being labeled as too much. And also acknowledging the fact that we have a lot of working lines that have now intermingled into pet lines. So we're seeing a lot of really, really high drive dogs as pets in misaligned environments in a way that we didn't see at this rate 20 years ago or whatever. So I think it's important to be really honest with yourself about why you got your dog, about what is this creature? What is the genetic drive here? And if it's you that's labeling your dog as too much, again, get honest with yourself. If it's other people that are labeling your dog as too much, screw them. Doesn't matter, right? As long as you are doing right by your dog and meeting their needs and you're trying to figure it out, I don't expect you to be perfect. I don't expect you to get it right every time. I expect you to be figuring it out and keep trying every day, one foot in front of another. That's all it is.
I agree so much with that. It really is a mind shift, though. You have to be able to move all these predetermined things because there's so many years of dog culture that's like, do it this way, teach them to sit for this, teach them to stay for this, make them do this, make them do that, leash pressure, prongs, blah, blah, all the things, right? There are so many people that have learned certain ways of training that they've become household standards that when you ask people, not trainers, people who've had pets, people who've had dogs, what should I do? I'm struggling with this. They're going to throw out something that they think is a solution because they've seen it on TV. They heard about it on a podcast, read it in a book somewhere, something like that. It's popular culture to throw a solution instead of sit down and evaluate the situation, which really sucks because it is about the dog in front of you. It is about their needs and their drives and their genetics and all of those things. And when you're going to somebody that doesn't understand that and asking for help, you're really just digging yourself deeper into the situation instead of solution. And it sucks that more people are not comfortable saying, I need help, because we're all out here making mistakes too. What do you think about your work today? Mentorships, courses, unpacked, dog training bites, out of everything, what are you most proud of?
I think it's probably a tie between two things. But if I had to pick one, it would be my business and my training because it's my everyday. It's where I can see what I do reflecting back to me and see the work and the relationships that I'm building there. It's just so powerful. It's become a part of who I am. And so I think that most proud of, most connected to, definitely, most proud of, maybe I would say, is in the brand and in owning the narrative and being at that place where I'm trying to embody freed by training. And then a close second would be unpacked because it really is just something I'm really passionate about because it is just a pure expression of me and Jerry trying to help people. That's just what it's always been. I feel strongly that that's going to continue to help people.
Your journey with Unpacked is really important because it shows you guys digging deep into a case, opening it up and showing people like, here's where the mistakes were made, but here's where we've gone. This is the things that have changed and look at how much they've progressed. And maybe it's small because it's, a big problem, Or maybe it's big because it's a smaller problem, but you guys break it down in a way that's easy for people to look at and understand without just throwing a bunch of terminology at them. So I think that it's a really great learning tool for pet parents. And also, I'm so glad that you're proud of your business. Like you should be. You should be proud of your business and you should feel connected to it. And you should be proud of yourself for investing so much of yourself into your business. And with that being said, if somebody who is listening to this feels like they've messed up way too much to be trusted again, their dog, with decision they've made in their life, or just in rebuilding a relationship, what would you say to them?
Don't think that I created this, but again, I don't know who to credit it to, but I firmly believe that there's no going down a road too far that you can't turn back. Because I've been down, right? I thought there was no coming back for me. And I promise that there is always a hope for something different or something better. You can always walk the path that you're on differently. You can always walk a different path, always. And there are people who will help you do that because when you are in it, it can feel impossible to see anything else, to see any other possible path or solution. So don't be afraid to reach out to get help. Just find somebody to just be an inspiration in your life because I certainly would not be here today had it not been for people as incredible beacons of light in my life. Find those beacons. Find somebody who radiates exactly what it is you want.
Madison, I am so grateful for you, for your truth, for your work, for the way that you show up for dogs and people alike, and of course, your friendship. Your story is one of the most powerful examples I know of what it means to turn your pain and your depression and your anxiety into your purpose. And it is such a beautiful story. And I am so grateful that you were willing to share it with us today. What would you like to leave the listeners with?
If you are struggling in any way with your dog or trying to figure out the next best step to take, because I get into that paralysis of like, what is the next right step? We get so afraid of doing the wrong thing. If you focus on communicating with your dog, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. Just focus on having clear, compassionate communication with your dog, and you can't go wrong.
Can't go wrong. All right, tell everybody where they can find you, how they can work with you, where they can connect with you, and all of the things.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is freedbytraining.com. I have a free muzzle course, which is where a lot of my clients get started. I have behavior cases. You can also book a free consult just to talk about what's going on with your dog and see what might be that next right step. There are also some resources there, free and low cost. You can also find me on Instagram and just DM me. Let me know what's going on with your dog. I'm happy to chat.
Madison, thank you so much again for being here. You guys be kind, spread joy, and communicate with your dog every single day. And we will see you next week on Straight Up Dog Talk.